3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Nittany No Huddle podcast.
From Philadelphia to Los Angeles
And everywhere in between.
filmed at the Nittany No Huddle studio.
It's Jordo, Zach, and Coach Devin covering all things Penn State football all the time.
This is from 45 and it's blocked. Lions scoop it up. Brad Haley will score.
And here we go.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Nittany No Huddle podcast. I know it's been, 7 months probably since we filmed an episode. So today we're going to cover the 2023 college football season preview for Penn State football. We're going to start by doing position groups, and then we'll go into win-loss, and we'll finish up with our prediction for top 25 teams for the start of the year going into week one. So I got Coach Devin and Zach with me. We'll just hit it off. We're going to change it up, and we're going to go with the offensive line first. Most people are doing, the running back room or quarterback room first. We're going to start with the offensive line. So I'll just get us started here. Starting off, probably the best left tackle in college football, in my opinion. Now, I'm not a professional, even though our podcast looks very professional now. We got Olu Fashanu, the redshirt junior, decided to come back for another year. Probably going to be a lottery pick. I mean, what more can we really say about this guy? Zach or Devin, any thoughts on him returning for this year and what we can expect from him, come week one?
Yeah, I think anytime I'll jump in, Devin, feel free to cut me off when you're ready. Anytime you can get a guy who seemed to be almost a consensus lottery pick, just from a talent standpoint, that's a huge win. The thing that, and I don't want to just gloss over how important that is, and the fact that he's been named, I think, a first-team preseason All-American, depending on what publication you're looking at. But the interesting thing is he actually only played, I think, 8 games last year. And he's relatively young. I think he's a redshirt sophomore, but you've got a lot of guys behind him that were able to play last year as well. So you almost get the best of both worlds, where you get this high impact star back, but because he didn't play the full season last year, you actually got some depth behind him as well. So you're, the way I look at this offensive line picture right now is you really got about 7 guys, as I see it, that are back with either full-time starting experience or enough experience that it's not really like a new guy that you're breaking into the rotation if injuries occur. So anyway, I kind of jumped away from Olu Fashanu there, but yeah, what can you say? First team All-American, preseason hype. That's huge. That's something that, despite Franklin recruiting at a pretty high level over the years and Penn State having a lot of guys go on to the NFL and have a lot of success, we just really haven't seen that at this position. And we're going to get into it, but if you look back last year, the big games, especially the Ohio State game, obviously the defensive end and tackle position was so massive. And if you have a guy like that can protect the quarterback, it's just worth so much.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I mean, with our backups, so much playing experience there due to injuries last year a little bit. But I mean, like you said, we have basically 7 starters. We got Tangwall coming back. We got Hunter at center. Sal Wormley played really well last year, I thought. And Caden Wallace as well. And then you have other people who came in and got experience. I don't know if you guys want to talk about them a little bit, or we can just kind of go through line by line each player. It's up to you.
I'll say something quick. Obviously, I think we as a podcast have always been hard on linemen, and we want a good running game because some of us didn't like Clifford as much as other people in this podcast. And having a running game could have been a big addition to that. And obviously we showed that last year. And this is the best offensive line we've ever had under Franklin. It's not even close, I don't think. And obviously Fashanu is going to be a top 10 pick if he stays healthy. Definitely going to be the highest Penn State guy drafted in a long time. But everyone on the line is really deep. And I saw a stat that we have 7 guys that started at least 5 games last year based on some injuries and filling in different spots. I don't think there's anybody in the country that can say that they have 7 guys on their offensive line that started at least 5 games last year. Obviously, I would say the biggest question mark is still Caden Wallace. I think he was a liability at times last year at right tackle and ended up losing his job at times and getting it back and fighting. There was a good clip of him trying to block Abdul Carter, who we'll obviously talk about later this year, and just celebrating like a madman whenever he got a good block on Abdul Carter, who's obviously a really good defensive player that we'll get to later. But I think if Caden Wallace can shore up the right side, and then the middle, I'm not worried about the middle at all. I don't know about you, Zach, but I like Tengwall, Norzad, and Wormley in the middle, and then Fashanu on the left side. Like this line is going to be really good if they all stay together.
Zach, you're muted still.
What I was going to say is this was something that kind of went under the radar last year at the Michigan game, given the way that the game played out. But Langdon Tenwall got hurt in warmups before that game. And then that obviously the game went the way it did. And I'm not suggesting that we were just one offensive guard away from competing in that game, but I think he's definitely one of the highest, from a recruiting standpoint, one of the highest rated offensive linemen that Franklin has brought in his tenure. And he's a guy that, at least for that one game, there was a noticeable drop off there. And I think he's a guy that I'm really excited to see. Devin, I'll echo your points about Caden Wallace. I think, and I mentioned the Ohio State game a little bit ago, right tackle was just a disaster for Penn State last year. Sometimes it was Caden Wallace. Sometimes it was Bryce Effner, and JT Tuamaloa from Ohio State, just basically whichever one was there, he just ragdolled him. And you just can't have that. And we talked about that ad nauseum with Clifford. And so that's, I guess, if you're looking at points of weakness or just questions about who's going to be the guy there. I don't know. Obviously, we say all the time we're not in camp. I don't know if Drew Shelton is getting a look. I mean, that's a guy that filled in last year really, really well. I talked earlier about Fashanu being out. That's a true freshman that stepped up, played the last 4 games of the season, played in the Rose Bowl, played really well. That's such a luxury to have, that you can bring in a true freshman like that with that type of talent, that he's able to contribute later in the season, but then also that he's coming back and it starts in the Rose Bowl. He comes back and he's not even locked into to get a starting job. So again, it's just, I don't want to be repetitive, but the depth there is just such a luxury at a position where injuries can often really rack up over the course of a season, and just having guys that you can slide in at different positions is really big.
And I think that's what JB Nelson does really well too. He can fill in a lot of different spots as needed. And obviously he's not starting for a reason. And we always say, we're not in camp, and there's a reason he's not starting. But I think JB Nelson can play 3 or 4 spots on the line in reserve duty. And I think he's a guy that a lot of teams would love to have that can play those extra positions.
Yeah, I agree completely, Devin. And with that depth, one thing to not be concerned about, but if Fashanu is going to be a lottery pick, he may not risk playing injured as much as he may have last year, or if he picks up, stingers or, bumps and bruises along the way, twist an ankle, you may see him come out of the game slightly more often, just because he's trying to protect himself too. So having all that depth allows us to get those other people and get those reps. I'm very excited about the offensive line, which I never thought I would utter under Franklin's control, but I'm very excited. Probably that's my highest excitement position group. Probably why I decided we should start with them, because so much depth, so much talent. We'll see what they can do against some of those big teams, and they may really surprise us. So I think our ceiling for the offensive line is very high. So I'm very excited for that.
One other name, Jordan.
Oh, go ahead.
One other name before we go. Like you said about if Fashanu were to get dinged up and sit out maybe a little longer than we expect or anything, keep an eye on Javen Williams from Wyomissing. Really high recruited guy. He is enormous. I stood beside him whenever West Perry played them in the district championship game, and I felt like a tiny little person. He is huge, and he was recruited really high. I think that Franklin likes him even more. I know he's listed as 3rd string right now, but I keep hearing he's working his way up. I'm sure they would love to redshirt him if possible, but he's a name that I would keep an eye on if there's any injuries on the line.
Yeah, I agree. And when it comes to redshirting, I feel like redshirting is not as important with the transfer portal anymore, just because you have guys moving all the time. And if, you're good enough to play, you're going to want to play. So,
and the new rule that allows you to play in no more than 4 games and keep your red shirt is also, I think, really important. And I think Franklin has done a pretty good job since that rule has gone into effect of identifying kind of early on who are the guys that we know are going to contribute and we're going to burn their shirt and we're okay with it. And then who are the guys that we, to Jordan's point, or in the new age of recruiting, that we just got to get this guy on the field because we got to convince him he's got a future here. And in some ways, player retention with the portal era is actually as important as recruiting. I mean, you get them here, but with the ease of the portal and coaches being able to contact you after the season and keeping guys on the roster is really difficult, and managing that and making sure you're getting guys playing time, but not burning red shirts for guys that you think you might need to, you want to keep that extra year is something that it's just a whole nother layer that you didn't used to have, because I think it used to be if you basically took one snap on the field, you burned your red shirt. So that, Williams, Alex Birchmeyer is another pretty highly rated offensive line recruit. That those are guys that I would expect we're going to see them at least somewhat. Maybe the Delaware game, probably the UMass game. Ideally, some of the other Big Ten games would be the type where you can get those guys in, and you get a look at them either way too. That's the other nice thing with that new rule is you bring these freshmen in and you figure out what you have without having to, put them into do or die situations.
Yeah. And with that being said, I think our coaching staff does a really good job of being like open with not only the players, but the press as well. I've seen just Franklin going out there, going on podcasts and things and talking about how he's so excited for our new athletic director, and everything is it's like in a line. So he can go to the athletic director and request different things now that maybe he wasn't able to under Sandy Barbara. Just interesting to hear him talk about that in public, because he's usually pretty closed off. But I think that ties into keeping people on the roster. Like, hey, I'm really close with AD, if there's things that aren't meeting your guys' standards, like what can we do about it?
Yeah, I think I've seen him use sort of the green light, yellow light, red light analogy with the freshmen when he's talking to the press. Guys that like Tony Rojas, linebacker, is a guy we're gonna talk about later. He's definitely in the green light camp. There's probably some others that might be in that. Singleton and Allen last year were definitely guys that coming out of camp and probably even before camp, they knew these are guys that are going to help us. We're burning the red shirt, so be it, right? Yeah. And you just kind of want to have a game plan going into the season, because you don't want to be making those decisions on the fly, especially to your point, Jordan, as far as just sort of like synergy across the program and Franklin as a recruiter and as the head coach, and you're having these conversations with the parents in the living room, and you're having these sort of game planning the future of these young men, and then you don't want to be making decisions on the fly.
Yeah. And I'm very excited about just hearing that in the public space. It seems like we're very in line, and Franklin went on air talking about how he's getting a lot more yeses from the athletic department. So that's, good to hear. It's good for recruiting. It's good for keeping people in the program, which we really haven't seen a lot of transfers out. Now we haven't seen too many transfers in, but it's a perfect segue into our wide receiver room with Dante Cephas coming in from Kent State. Now I'm interested to get your guys' opinion on this. I've heard he's still adjusting. He hasn't really, I'm not at camp, so I can't, speak on that, but he hasn't been that dominant number one receiver we were kind of hoping is the word out of camp. But from a physicality standpoint, 6 foot, 187 pounds. He has played against other Power 5 teams. His stats aren't crazy. He played against Georgia last year. He had 3 catches, 25 yards. Getting 1 catch against Georgia, I think, is kind of impressive for Kent State. I'm excited. I know he has had issues with drops in the past, 14 career drops. Some of that, I'd have to watch the tape on every drop because they're not all built equally. But I'm excited to, get a new guy in. I think our wide receiver room definitely needed some improvement after last year. What's your guys' take on the wide receiver room?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cephas is a guy that in a perfect world steps up and is your wide receiver one. I want to say it was Sports Illustrated, I think I saw, where they had him listed as second team All-American preseason, which I thought was just kind of shocking. I know he was a guy that when he was in the portal, he was highly sought after by a lot of programs. So this wasn't some, like diamond in the rough that Franklin found. This was a guy that everybody wanted. But again, it's easy to look at the body and the physique and say he's a Big Ten guy, but the jump from the MAC to the Big Ten is obviously a real jump, and it remains to be seen the sort of the week in, week out standard that you have to set for yourself to play in a Big Ten is just different. And so I think he's gonna have a good year. It's really hard to just sort of plug him in as the wide receiver one and say that's the guy that's going to be our big play threat. He's going to be the stud on the outside. But at the same time, I'm happy we got him because Franklin obviously saw a need there, and he went out and found guys that I think he feels fit the program. One thing I'll say, Jordan, you kind of teed up this a minute ago. Franklin has not been one of the more aggressive coaches in the portal, but I have to give him credit. I think he identifies when he needs to use the portal, and he goes out and he gets a guy and it works, right? So Chop Robinson, perfect guy that they had recruited earlier in the year, or earlier in his career, somewhat local kid, defensive end. We had a need there. Goes out, gets him. He looks like he's going to be a complete stud and has been so far. Jair Brown, Jaquan Brisker, both came in through the portal. Even a guy like Hunter Norzad, which was really not that big of a portal acquisition. I think he came from Cornell or Colgate, or maybe he's the Harvard guy. But in any event, for the most part, when Franklin goes to the portal, it works out. He's kind of selective, but I think he's shown that when he uses it, he knows how to use it, and he finds guys that fit the team.
Yeah, and he recently was on another podcast talking about recruiting in general and how they look for guys that fit the program that we want to build and look for players' characters that fit with, the culture. And I think that's what he does is he finds these guys who, okay, not only do they meet the physical standards, but, they're also the type of guy who we can plug into our system, which I've been pretty impressed with our limited but effective portal usage, like you're saying. What do you think?
Yeah, I think part of the
go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to say part of the reason his portal usage as far as acquisitions is fairly limited is because he doesn't lose a lot of guys to the portal. So we don't have these off seasons where you have this mass exodus like some of these other programs see, and you just from a numbers standpoint, you have to go into the portal and grab 20 guys, because I think whether it's through recruiting, as Jordan just mentioned, and identifying the right type of people that you want in your program, but then also retention. Like, just you kind of have to re-recruit your players after you keep them in the portal age. Now you've got to be constantly recruiting the guys that you already have, and I have to say I think the staff must do a really good job of that, because you just really don't see much you don't see a lot of guys leaving the program that surprise you. I think at the end of the year there's always guys that are somewhat buried down the depth chart and they leave and you're like, yeah, I get it, that makes sense. There's not some of these odd players that you see from other schools every year now. You see like a Keon Coleman from Michigan State, who's a stud receiver up there, and all of a sudden he leaves and goes to Florida State. And we haven't really had to deal with that. And I think that's something that you have to give the staff credit for. Sorry, Devin, I kind of jumped in.
Right. I don't really have anything else to add on the transfer portal. I know, Zach, you're obviously, out of the three of us, probably the best in tune with recruiting and the transfer portal type stuff. So I'm happy to defer my time to you there. To get us back to the wide receivers, I guess. I think Cephas is a big question mark for me. And I know Jordan, you have a category later on, like our biggest question marks. Wide receivers is by far my biggest question mark. I know for most people it's Drew Aller, and we'll get to that later. But if Drew Aller has no one to throw to, then how big of a fault is it of Drew Aller's? You know what I mean? Cephas, to me, is not a number one guy. I think he would be great as a number two or a slot. But that's what Penn State just kind of recruits. We just keep recruiting slot guys that are the same height as me, just more athletic, obviously, by a lot. But I would love to see some wide receivers on the depth chart that are taller than I am. And I just, if for whatever reason, I don't know if that's going to change down the road as Yurcik gets more involved in his system, if that's 100% a Franklin thing. I'm not sure, because you look at Cephas at 6 foot, Harrison Wallace, who I think is in line for a big season, but I can't quite get a read on him if he's going to stay consistent. He averaged the most yards per catch other than Keandre Lambert-Smith last year, so he is capable of some big plays, but he's only 6'1", and then obviously Lambert-Smith is 6'1", and he is not a number 1 wide receiver in my opinion. He has kind of fallen down my favorite Penn State player rankings. He keeps going down and down and down. I'm low on him right now, so hopefully he has a good season, but I'm just not convinced. So back to the transfer stuff, I will say, and Jordan, you have this on our notes, we did get a transfer from Florida State that is 6'4". Didn't put up big numbers at Florida State, had very respectable numbers, but he's 6'4", 201, and I'm hoping that in this year and to the next year, because he's a junior this year, I'm hoping he could kind of be that guy and take some away, some of these little wide receivers that we're so in love with.
You stole my point. I was gonna, when Zach brought up, Florida State, I was like, well, we just got a transfer, junior Malik McLean, like you said, 6'4". I was going back and looking. He really didn't have that many passes thrown to him. He didn't play a lot of snaps, so that could be why his numbers, are what they are. But a 6'4", 200-pound receiver, that's a great out when you don't have anybody to throw to, and you just want to throw a jump ball or something.
Right, so maybe we can stop throwing fades to 6 foot tall wide receivers, and we have a 6'4" guy. Is he going to catch it? I don't know enough about him yet, but I'd still rather fade to a 6'4" than a 6 foot.
I would have to agree. And then you forgot our other wide receiver, 6'1", Liam Clifford.
I left him for you. I mean,
I'm really disappointed that over the last 2 years we did not get a Clifford to Clifford touchdown.
And I like Liam. I think Liam has a lot of upside. I think every time I saw him play last year, I think he runs good routes. I think he has good hands. I don't know if he's going to be a big target this year. He's kind of like in that middle range of like a 4 to a 6 on the depth chart. But I do like Liam Clifford. I probably like Liam more than I like Sean.
Yeah, I think this is I totally agree with Devin's the overall point of this discussion, which is that wide receiver is a question mark, and I think everybody has to be cognizant of that. I also get the sense from and we talked about Cephas, we talked about Harrison Wallace, we talked about obviously Lambert-Smith is the you'd like him to step up and maybe be the wide receiver 1 just because he's the guy that's been there the longest and he's had a lot of success. He's had some ups and downs. I'm perhaps not as down on him as Devin is, but those are probably your 3 guys going into the season that you're counting on getting the most snaps and being your most productive wideouts. But I think you got to mention a guy like Omari Evans as a true freshman last year, got a lot of time. They actually burned his red shirt, which was kind of odd because he didn't play a ton, but even in the Purdue game, he played right away in the Purdue game. Liam Clifford was out there. He played real minutes in the Rose Bowl. I think a guy like Caden Saunders, he was heavily recruited. He's another one of the sort of shorter slot receiver type guys. There's sort of a second group of receivers behind what I think are the starting 3 that I would not be shocked to see one or more of those guys really elevate and perhaps kind of eat into Cephas or Wallace or Lambert-Smith's role. It could be Liam Clifford. It could be Omari Evans. Could be Caden Saunders. I actually think, I guess if I'm going to go out and make a prediction, which why the heck not, right? I think a guy like Omari Evans could have a really big year. He's super fast. He may be a great asset for Drew Aller with the deep ball. One thing I think we're going to talk about for me is we might take a step back from Clifford with Aller in some respects, maybe the intermediate passing game, but the ability to take the top off the defense with Aller and having those sort of home run threats, a guy like Omari Evans, I think is really important when you're going to have the running game that we think that we're going to have. And if you can parlay that into a deep threat and just you basically, how do you defend against a team that can go deep on you and consistently run the ball? So Omari Evans, that's the name I'm looking at as far as the wide receiver group, but I'm totally with Devin that it is a question mark. And until we see how it plays out, it's it's something that should be at least slightly concerning.
Yeah, I agree with your points. Speaking of passing game, our intermediate passing game, we're returning some great tight ends, not only for passing, but also blocking. We got Theo Johnson coming back. I didn't realize how big of a guy he was. 6'6", 264 pounds. That is a very big tight end. And he has very good hands, as we saw at points last year. And then you also have Tyler Warren coming back, who we've seen him throw the ball before, even run it in. So both very good tight ends, two very solid starting tight ends that are also very effective in the running block as well, which just add that to our already stacked offensive line. You put those guys out. I mean, we're very well off on the offensive line, especially for the run game. What do you guys think about our tight ends for this year?
I think the tight ends are going to be really good. Obviously, losing Brenton Strange hurts. I just saw today he's like the highest rated tight end by Pro Football Report or something like that, which is kind of crazy. But I mean, he's or highest rated rookie tight end. Maybe that makes more sense now that I'm rereading it. But either way, I think one thing that you said, Jordan, specifically, is that these guys can block. And you look at guys that we've had in the past who obviously, if you've watched this podcast before, you know we love the big guys. We know we love offensive line. You know we love tight ends. But if you look at guys like Jesse James, Mike Gesicki, Pat Fryermuth, those guys were receivers who played tight end. These guys, Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, and even Brenton Strange last year, I think they're linemen that can catch. And Tyler Warren, I think, is in line for a really big year. I think we are going to run a lot of two tight end stuff because I don't think we're confident in our wide receivers enough that having Theo and Tyler out there at 6'6" each, I mean that's some safe throws that Drew Aller can make in his first year as a starter.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about both of them. I don't know very much about Khalil Dinkins. Maybe you do, Zach or Jordan. I don't really remember him playing at all last year, but being fourth or fifth string last year, he probably didn't play very much. But even him at 6'4", 250, I mean, that's a heck of a third string tight end.
Yeah, I agree. And we might even see them, slide in and play that kind of fullback position that we've seen them line up with every once in a while. Yeah, I'm very excited about the tight ends. Zach, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Dinkins is a name that actually coming out of out of the summer camp, Franklin has been mentioning a lot. He's kind of been sometimes you don't know coming out of camp. Coaches will just say whatever and coach speak and whatnot, but sometimes you'll hear them repeatedly go out of their way to praise guys, and sometimes that's a signal. And Dinkins is a name that I've been hearing him mention. Another name that I have to call out, and maybe this is another prediction, but Andrew Raplia, the freshman, 6'4", 250, is out of Massachusetts. He was originally committed to Michigan. He's a guy that when you watch his tape, he looks like he's ready to step on a Big Ten field immediately. He's kind of at a stacked position, and I completely agree with everything Devin just said. I mean, we are. It's an embarrassment of riches, especially when you had Brenton Strange last year, who somewhat surprisingly for me anyway, I don't follow the NFL or the draft process that closely, but he went in the second round. And then you look at somebody like Theo Johnson, and you wonder, like, if this guy puts the year up that we think he might, and then to Devin's point, with the body and the physique that he has, like, guy could be a stud NFL tight end. I mean, he's of the two. I think Warren is nice because he's kind of sort of a jack of all trades. We've talked about, his ability to throw the ball. He played high school quarterback, but Theo Johnson's the guy that, he's a guy that could be in line for some big numbers this year. But we'll see. So I just think it's, again, sort of an embarrassment of riches that we've got basically two starters. We've got Khalil Dinkins looks like he's slotted into the number 3 role, and Franklin has obviously been speaking highly about him. And then there's a true freshman I think is just waiting in the wings that, honestly, the comparison for me, maybe just because he's white, is Pat Fryermuth. Like, if you go back and watch this kid's film, he has that type of build and physique and toughness and just catches everything around him. And he just seems to be big enough to have that Big Ten body.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, just we are loaded with talent, especially on the offensive side. And speaking of that talent, we're moving on to our running back room, which I mean, arguably is one of the best in the country. We had the only 2 running backs in Big Ten history that each had over 700 yards in one season. Like that by itself is just impressive when you think about the running backs that the Big Ten has produced. We got Nicholas Singleton coming back and Katron Allen. I mean, what more do we need to say about Singleton, really? I mean, everybody's seen his game film, just a home run hitter. And then you have Katron Allen coming in, who's that every down, tough back, gets the, 5 yards in a cloud of smoke kind of plays. But, he's great too. I don't know which one I'm more excited for, to be honest. And I know some people have Singleton on the Heisman list, but I can see them splitting a lot of carries. So maybe those yards, you won't see that as much, but I'm excited that we just have 2 really solid running backs that, don't turn the ball over a lot, which I think is huge to have. What are you guys' thoughts?
Pretty much I don't even know what can be said at this point that's not cliche. And it's another, I used the phrase embarrassment of riches a minute ago with the tight end room, and it's probably even more apt here. It's just, it's just impossible to even describe what those guys did as freshmen last year, especially, it's easy right now with Penn State's, ranked in the top 10 going into the season. Everybody's feeling really great. It's easy to forget where we were at last year. And we're talking about question marks right now. And we're like, wide receiver's kind of a question mark. We might talk a little bit about how quarterback's a question mark. Defensively, I don't know that there's a question mark on the defensive side of the ball. Last year, we had question marks everywhere. And one of them was the running back room. And we spent a lot of time talking about, we've got Kevon Lee. We kind of like a little bit of the stuff that he does. We lost Noah Kane. Is that a big loss, or can we reproduce that? And then you have these 2 freshmen, and we knew they were talented guys, but you didn't know they were going to produce like this. And now coming into the season with 2 guys who, to Jordan's point, probably if for either one, if the other one wasn't there, you're looking at a guy who might be on Heisman lists. But I think because they're definitely going to split carries, that there's no way either one of them is going to get enough of the ball to actually get up a Heisman list. But I think that's for the betterment of the team, that at the end of the year, they're both going to be fresh, because in a perfect world, I mean, I'd love to see games where both these guys get 15, 17 carries and we run the ball 40 times. And the other name for me, and this has flown under the radar, and this gets back to one of my earlier points about giving Franklin a lot of credit for his usage of the portal. Trey Potts is a huge get for Penn State. This is a kid out of Williamsport, played at Minnesota. He's had a lot of success at Minnesota. He's 5'9", 218. Obviously, he knows his role coming into this scenario. He's a senior, right? So he knows what his role is going to be. And I think it's going to be a perfect 3rd down back, perhaps, and just the number 3 guy in the rotation to give the first 2 a break. I just think that was such a good get by Franklin, especially if you look at the overall depth chart at the running back position. You've got a couple true freshmen after Singleton and Allen. So having that guy, that 3rd running back in the mix, was such a good get.
Yeah, I agree. I'm surprised a lot more people aren't talking about him, because he can run the ball, and just getting that 3rd person, even throws off the defense. They may see him on the field, think, oh, it's not Allen or Singleton. Okay, they're probably passing, and then you hand it off to him, and next thing you know, he's 20 yards downfield. So, Devin, any additional thoughts on the running back room?
No, it's so nice going into a season where I think running backs are one of our biggest strengths as a whole unit. Obviously, I was really high on Nicholas Singleton last year in our preview podcast, and he turned out to have a really good season. Katron Allen kind of snuck up on me. I didn't know him as much because he's not from this area the way Nick Singleton is, where we're all kind of from. I love Katron Allen. I think he's an outstanding running back. He could start for probably 75 to 80% of the country, if not higher. And him and Singleton are just going to split carries, and both of them do things very, very well. For me, I think the biggest jump that they need to make this year is in the receiving game. I didn't really think either one of them was utilized last year, and maybe that's because they were true freshmen, and we did have some wide receivers, and Clifford had tight ends to throw it to, and all those things. But one thing that Penn State has done when they're very good, you think back to Saquon Barkley and Miles Sanders specifically, we incorporated our running backs in the passing game a lot. And I'm interested to see if that is a Yurcich staple, if that's something that he wants to do more this year, because I feel like in the past, whenever he was at Oklahoma and places like that was something that he did. So I'm interested to see how that works, and totally echo what you guys are saying about Trey Potts. The fact that he's a senior who got a lot of playing time at Minnesota, transfers in to sit behind two sophomores, says that he understands his role. Because why would he come here if he thinks he's just going to start over both of them, two of the best running backs in the Big Ten last year as true freshmen? I think he's a great third option whenever we need him, or if, knock on wood, either something happens to either Singleton or Allen. Now we have a legit guy that we can use, whereas without Trey Potts, there's a lot of question marks for fourth string if he wouldn't have transferred in. So I think that's a huge get to Franklin's credit.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll be very disappointed if we don't run some of that halfback shark wheel out of the back,
Have to run the wheel.
All right. So who's going to throw him the ball? We got Drew Aller coming in. Clifford's gone, as you can see from our little animation there at the bottom. He's out now with my Green Bay Packers. But for me, biggest question mark is, how is Drew Aller going to adjust? I mean, he has not a great wide receiver room, but arguably one of the best offensive lines in front of him. They're going to give him time to throw the ball. It's, can he make the throws, really, for me? I mean, Penn State Nation is hyped up on Drew Aller. They were calling for him to start last year. So, I mean, every analyst has talked about Drew Aller. It's going to be up to him to see what he can do on the field. I mean, he does have a very good arm. He can definitely hit over the top. The question is he going to be able to handle the pressure? Because he really didn't play in a lot of high pressure situations last year. What do you guys think?
I'll let Devin start, since this is his boy, and he wanted him to play more last year probably than he got to. But
so the first thing I'll say is, why is Franklin hiding this? Because if I love Bo Prabula, I know I said it last year. I truly do. I think he's going to be a solid quarterback. But if he starts over Drew Aller, then we probably have a problem. So I don't know why Franklin, again, was asked today. So the day that we're recording this, they just had a press conference after practice, and again was asked multiple times, are you going to name a starting quarterback? And he just said, no, not yet. I don't understand why, because Drew Aller is the guy. Obviously, I think that we need to, when I say we, I mean me. I think I need to temper expectations, and there's a lot of Nittany No Huddle Nation out there that needs to kind of reel it in a little bit, because for all intents and purposes, he is kind of a freshman. He's making his first year starting. Obviously, he played in 10 games last year out of 13. He only threw 60 passes. I think the thing that stands out to me is he didn't throw an interception on those 60 passes. It's a really good sign for me. I think he's got to keep that number. That has to be a single-digit number this year for us to be successful. If he starts getting into the 10 to 12 range, I'm starting to get pretty nervous. But Drew Aller has all the physique and the body makeup to be an elite quarterback. He's not going to be an elite quarterback. He's not going to win the Heisman. He shouldn't even be in consideration. These people that are saying he's on the Heisman watch list. No, you're wrong. He's not there yet. But he will be, I think, in a couple years. So everyone just needs to relax, let him do his thing. Yurcich will put him in great positions. I think that's one thing that I know that Mike Yurcich is going to put Drew Aller in a position to be successful and utilize this running game that we're so lucky to have, and the tight ends and shorter passes. But then when we need to break one, we have that guy that can throw it accurately 50, 60 yards down the field, right? And Clifford was not that guy. He didn't have that 40 to 50 yard range accurate. He could throw the ball. There's no doubt about it. I think Jordan, you were telling me, I haven't watched any preseason football. Jordan was telling me he made a really great pass in the Packers preseason game. It was like a 40 or something yard through the air. He has the capability. He's just not as accurate. And I think Drew Aller will be accurate this year.
Yeah, and not to cut you off, but I think a lot of people are on that hype train and forget last year. We were talking about 2024 season was going to be our year. Like, yeah, I think because of the success of last year and now all these people coming back, we kind of jumped ahead and people are like, oh, he has to be Heisman contender this year. It's like, just relax a little bit. We have a great running game. We have great tight ends. Let them carry the load and make the smart passes, that we know he can make. Just, I'm a little nervous about it. And I can't imagine being in his shoes with, I don't know if he's active on social media, but all these people just hyping it up all the time. Like, that's a lot of pressure to be under for basically being a freshman. Like, say what you want about Clifford. Like, he pretty much played the same all the time. It wasn't necessarily great. It wasn't necessarily bad, but he was consistently him. So,
and Jordan, the one thing that Sean Clifford did that is going to be incredibly hard for Drew Aller to replace is just his leadership. The guys love Sean Clifford. He was a leader in that locker room and in the huddles and those situations. Is Drew Aller that guy? Obviously, he's probably been playing quarterback since he was like 7 years old, so he has that experience. But it's a big step to look over at Ali Fashanu and say, "Hey, get your crap together. I need you to play better." Whereas if Sean Clifford said that last year, being a 4-year starter, you kind of took it to heart, and I think that's something that is underrated that Penn State might miss at least for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Especially, we haven't got to it yet, but that Illinois game, that trap game right there. Can Drew Aller handle that situation?
Yeah, and you're talking about the difference between how old's Aller? 22 maybe?
Probably 19 or 20.
Yeah, and then you had, Clifford, who was like 38. So, I mean, that's hard to replace. Zach, go ahead.
So I will start, and again, I'll harken back to last year. We talked a lot, especially in the early going, about I don't know if it was ever really a QB controversy. I think everybody knew Clifford was going to start when he was coming back, but we knew the leash would be short. We knew that they would want to try to get Aller on the field. I have to say, James Franklin and Mike Yursich did a masterful job last year, because I think long-term, or not long-term, but over the course of that season, Sean Clifford gave Penn State the best chance to have a really successful year. And at the end of the day, he was not really the difference in the Michigan game. Arguably, you could say he was the difference in the Ohio State game. I think, we can debate that. But they also made sure that they were building for the long term and keeping Drew Aller happy and improving him by giving him real minutes in real games. I kind of agree, and I kind of disagree. Devin mentioned that he didn't get a ton of high intensity moments, and that's largely true, but there were some. I mean, right out of the gate, the Purdue game, everybody remembers when Sean Clifford had to go back to the locker room and whatever. Drew Aller's out there in the second half, and I think it was apparent to every Penn State fan just from that one drive in the very first game, like, okay, this kid belongs, right? I mean, he wasn't perfect, he overthrew a third down pass, but you could just tell by his presence in the huddle, his presence in the pocket, and his ability to spin the football. This guy belongs. And then they just continued to give him enough action over the course of the season that I think he's a sophomore, and that's what he is, because he played in, I think, 10 or 11 games. So I think you have to give the coaching staff credit for actually handling what I think at the beginning of the year, everybody looked at as a really tough situation. What do we do here? I think they did a really good job. The second thing I'll say, and this kind of echoes what you both have said, I don't expect to see him anywhere near a Heisman Trophy list, and anybody that has him on one, I think, isn't paying attention. I would love a very boring, competent year from Drew Aller. Just hand the ball off 40 times, a lot of play action. I frankly, I don't even necessarily need to see a super high completion percentage. I think it's important that he take care of the ball. Devin mentioned, keeping the interceptions down. Because a punt with this defense, there's nothing wrong with punting, right? don't turn the ball over and take a lot of shots. And that's something you're going to hear me say a lot is with this running game, and teams are going to have to commit to step up and stop the running game. It's really important that you take your shots and you keep them concerned on the back end, and you give them that two-pronged attack. And so for me, I just think you don't ask too much out of them, right? You try to keep it simple. If things go wrong offensively, it's probably not going to be if they go wrong and we can't run the ball, then I think we're all going to be shocked, right? And so then if you get to that position where we have to ask Drew Aller to do a lot, things have already gone wrong.
Yeah, I agree. We'll move on. Finishing out the offense here. Who are your guys' best, or who do you think is going to have the best offensive season, or who's the most meaningful person on our offense, really? For me, I think it's Olu Fashanu. I think if he can stay healthy and just protect that left side, like that is just going to open up so much for the offense. Devin, go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely didn't want to pick the same guy since we didn't fully talk about this. I picked Nick Singleton. I think he's in for a huge year. Do I think he's a Heisman contender? Absolutely not. Running backs, if you're not a quarterback, you're not going to win the Heisman, basically, with who's there. But I think the Nick Singleton is going to have a great year, and the fact that having Katron Allen allows Singleton to be our return guy again, I think he's gonna break one on the kick return game this year without a doubt, if not a couple. And I think that will help him even offensively, that those reps on kick return. So I think Nick Singleton is going to be our best offensive player by the end of the year.
Solid pick. I can't.
Yeah, there's just so many different ways to go, and I don't know. I'm going to go with a name that's not necessarily our best offensive player, but I think a guy that has a chance to be completely dominant is Theo Johnson. I talked about him a little bit earlier. And it's a little odd maybe picking a tight end, but A, I don't want to duplicate you guys' picks, and B, I think we just have so many studs at so many positions that yes, we know who Nick Singleton is, we know who Katron Allen is, we know who Olu is. I just think Theo Johnson's a guy that could just have a humongous year. I mean, I think we've talked about him a lot last year as well. So that's a guy I'm watching. If I had to pick a guy on the offensive line other than Olu, I'll go back to Landon Tengwall. I think he could have a really good year. I think he was having a really good year last year before that injury derailed his season. So I'm really eager to see what he brings to the table.
Yeah. I mean, the offense is so loaded. It's like you could pick anybody out of there.
The crazy thing is I think the offense is not loaded when you compare it to the defense. And so that's your segue maybe, but
yeah. Well, I was going to go with biggest question marks, but we've kind of already talked that. So we can move on to defense. You want to talk about a loaded side of the ball, like you said, Zach. Defense, starting with the defensive line. Chop Robinson coming back is going to be huge. I mean, everybody has seen the tape on Chop. He had a phenomenal year last year. I don't know if you guys want to. I'm not as familiar with the defensive side of the ball. I've been kind of focusing more on the offense, but we definitely have a lot of depth on the defensive side, especially the line. Just looking at the depth chart, we got basically all redshirt seniors, and then Chop Robinson, a junior, transferred in. So what's your guys' take on our defensive line?
Go ahead, Zach. I know how much you love these guys.
Yeah.
I like to know.
Well, so I think I'll break it down, maybe DNs and the interior linemen. I think you've got Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, and Danny Dennis Sutton, three guys who probably would be the premier pass rusher on just about any team other than maybe the very tip of the sword as far as the elite teams. You just have we should have an elite pass rush with multiple guys. Amin Vanover, Smith Vilbert, Zariah Fisher, all these guys got at least some action last year. And it's one thing that Franklin has done a really good job over the years is recruiting the pass rushing positions and getting enough guys into the mix that we're just constantly rotating and we're staying fresh. I think if you had to try to find a question mark or had to try to find a negative, it's that we are perhaps still a little undersized. Really across the board on the defensive line, at the defensive end and the defensive tackle position. But I don't know that that's necessarily a problem as much as it's just a sort of the blueprint of who Penn State wants to be defensively, especially with the Manny Diaz style right now, is we're willing to trade a little bit of bulk for speed and athleticism and length. So this sets up for a year. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but with what should be a pretty good Penn State offense, a lot of games where Penn State gets out early and gets to a big lead, I'm expecting to see a lot of sacks and a lot of tackles for losses, because you're going to have teams in a lot of obvious pass rushing situations. And that's to me, this team is built kind of like complementary football between the offense and the defense, because I think the strength of our defense will be pass defense with the secondary and the pass rush. Not that I expect us to be pretty competent and as far as run defense goes, and I think we're to be very good at linebacker. But for me, the strength is really that pass rush coupled with the secondary. And so if the offense is doing its job, again, we don't really need, like we talked about earlier, we don't need an elite offense. We're not going to need to score 40 points a game. But if we're getting out early and getting ahead and then just basically telling the other team you're going to have to chase, and then you're just pinning your ears back with Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac and all those guys and rushing the passer, that to me that's the blueprint.
Yeah, and just to highlight that point, 4 out of 5 of our sack leaders in production are back this year. So that kind of speaks for itself there. Devin, go ahead, finish up anything with the defensive line.
Yeah, I think our D-line has a chance to really be elite. Like Zach said, we are a little undersized, but I think that sometimes being undersized on the D-line can work to your advantage because of that speed, and we definitely have speed. So I'm really intrigued because I think this defensive line could be elite. To mention those numbers, Zach, that you kind of hinted at, Adisa Isaac last year, 11 TFLs, 4 sacks. Chop Robinson, 10 TFLs, 5.5 sacks. DDS, 3.5 TFLs, 3 of them were sacks and 3 QB hits. Amin Vanover, 4.5 TFLs, a sack, 3 QB hits. Hakeem Beeman, 6 TFLs. Like, those are guys that we're rotating a lot of minutes with other guys that have now graduated and still getting those types of numbers. I think that our defensive line, even Devon Ellies, only had 15 tackles last year. He had 2 sacks and a QB hit. That's pretty good numbers for that kind of kid. So I'm really excited to see how the D-line does. Hopefully, specifically next Saturday night against West Virginia, they really have a coming out party and people really take note, because West Virginia's offensive line is not very good, and I think that they have a chance to really set the tone right away for how this season's going to go.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a great transition right into our linebacking core. I mean, we got Abdul Carter, who is an absolute stud. I think the way our defense works in that setup where we get teams in 3rd and long and can really, put the ears back and go after the quarterback, it really sets up those kind of numbers you're talking about. Zach, you want to hit on our linebackers a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do a great job of following nationally along with other teams outside of Penn State or outside the Big Ten, we'll say. But I would be hard pressed to think that there's a team with 2 better outside linebackers than Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs anywhere outside of maybe like Georgia, Bama. Those guys are just unbelievable. It was somewhat surprising to me that Jacobs came back last year, actually, because I think he's a redshirt junior. But I mean, those guys are sideline to sideline, rush the passer, tackle the ball carrier, play pass defense, just absolute studs. And Carter, again, mentioning Aller in the Purdue game, Abdul Carter, kind of very unfortunately for him, got ejected in the Purdue game over what was kind of a weak targeting call. But it was immediately clear with Abdul Carter from watching him play, like, this guy belongs. As soon as he was on the field, you're like, this, number one, he doesn't look like a true freshman, and number two, he did not play like a true freshman. He just belonged, and he was everywhere for that Penn State defense last year. So I think, again, we talked about this. Maybe there's a little bit of uncertainty as to who is our middle linebacker. You had Kobe King and Tyler Elsdon both play a lot last year, and I think they both did some good things. I think clearly that is probably the weak point of the linebacking group. But again, the idea is if Penn State's offense is doing its job, this is going to be, this is going to be a situation where you're not going to have the middle linebacker on the field a ton anyway, because you're probably going to be in a lot of obvious passing situations where you're probably trading the middle linebacker for another cornerback, the slot corner, or another safety, which is something worth mentioning perhaps across the board is the unique combinations that we saw from Manny Diaz all last year, just taking linebackers off the field. I think there was in the Auburn game, there was moments where you had seven defensive backs on the field. So yeah, all that to say, Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs are just, I think they're both in for humongous years. And I think if you're an offense that's trying to stretch the field horizontally, those guys are just sideline to sideline guys. And
yeah, and to build on what you said there, Zach, I totally agree that I think our outside backers in Carter and Jacobs are arguably the best in the country, and one of them is a sophomore, and one of them is a junior. To your question, Jacobs is a true junior. And I know I do agree with you that middle linebacker is definitely the question out of those three. I think Kobe King is in for a big year. I think that he has had a good camp from every report I've read, and I think he's in for a big year. One stat before I throw it back to Jordan and we can move on. Those three, Carter, King, and Jacobs, last year combined for 159 tackles. What is that number going to be this year? I mean, two of them were freshmen last year, and they were still, again, splitting time with people. I think that our linebackers, to complement our defensive line, is just outstanding. And as we go into our defensive backs, every position is just loaded. Sure, it gets a little question mark as you get down to second, third string. But I think Tyler Elsdon is a solid backup. Obviously, I don't think he's like a phenomenal starter, but I think he's a really, really good backup. And Dominic DeLuca, we'll talk about him in special teams for a reason that was just announced today. I think he's a solid backup guy. And when you need a blow from Curtis Jacobs or Abdul Carter and you throw him out there, he's gonna manage. He's gonna be fine. So, and you mentioned earlier Tony Rojas. He's somebody that I keep reading about that they're very high on, and he's going to be playing. If he doesn't play against West Virginia, I'll be shocked. And if he doesn't play meaningful snaps against West Virginia, I will be shocked. So linebackers, man, LBU, we are LBU this year, no question.
Yeah, and how do you build on the linebackers? We return my favorite player on the defense, Kalen King. What more can you say about this guy? He went out there and, in my opinion, he outshone Joey Porter Jr. last year. I mean, our secondary is our secondary is even maybe more loaded than the defensive line and the linebackers. You got Keaton Ellis playing free safety, Jalen Reed at strong safety. I mean, we are pretty poised there. Zach, what's your opinion on our secondary?
Yeah, I think I'll sort of start where you ended with the safeties. And in a normal year, you'd lose a guy like Jair Brown, and you'd have to say, well, there's a question mark there because that dude was a stud, and how do you replace him? Well, again, with the way that Franklin builds depth and plays multiple guys at every position, plus the way that Manny Diaz set up his defense last year, you had 3 or 4 safeties on the field very, very often, right? So you have Jalen Reed, Keaton Ellis, Zakee Wheatley. I think even KJ Winston got a good bit of snaps last year. So you have guys. It's one of those things where not only do we have 2 starters coming back, it's not unfair to say we've got like 4 guys coming back with legitimate experience, and that's massive. Again, especially, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if things go well, this defense is going to be playing with a lead with teams that are in obvious passing situations, and you're going to be relying on your pass rush and your defensive secondary, which are your strengths. Kalen King, first team All-American. I think he had a better year than Joey Porter Jr. last year. I think he's just a guy that doesn't have quite the body that Porter has. So we'll see where he gets drafted. I think there's no chance he comes back this year unless at the end of this year, unless things go poorly for him. But he's not 6'2" and long armed the way Porter is, but he's just so instinctual, and he just I don't know. He just was awesome last year. A guy that just was. You just never saw him really out of position. You've got Daquan Hardy back. It seemingly for his 7th year as Penn State's nickel corner. He's had some moments. He's had some ups and downs last year. Johnny Dixon's another guy that he's had some ups and downs, but I think he largely had a really good year last year. So between the three of them, you've got three corners that you can say these guys are multi-year starters with a lot of experience who've done a lot of good things. You've got, again, to my mind, four safeties that you can legitimately say this guy's either a returning starter or a really experienced player. Most teams do not have that luxury. They just don't.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. I'm very excited for our secondary, and to all of Nittany No Huddle Nation, I was very wrong about our secondary last year. I remember that Purdue game. I was quite critical, to say the least, but I can admit when I was wrong, and I mean, like you said, Hardy.
We quickly learned who Charlie Jones was too. Keep that in mind. That dude was a stud last year. And so I think at the beginning of the year, we're all kind of like, who is this transfer from Iowa that we've never heard of that is just torching our secondary? And then he did that to everybody. That made me feel a little bit better. But
yeah, and they have maybe possibly a starting NFL quarterback who also showed up to play versus us. That was a tough road game to start the season.
Yeah,
but Zach or Devin, go ahead with any last thoughts on the secondary. And I think we've hit a lot of the key points on our secondary and our defense in general. I mean, we're loaded. We could talk ad nauseum about all these guys, but it's really going to come down to the games, and hopefully we're playing with a lead and can really let these guys off the leash a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I have a special place for these defensive backs. I love our linemen and I love our wide receivers, but these defensive backs are going to go under the radar, and they're going to put together a really good season. Like Zach said, I mean, we are deep and we are athletic. We've got good hands. All of these guys can pick off passes.
Experience too.
So much experience. One thing I'll say is Jalen Reed changed his numbers. So for those maybe not diehard fans and you're looking for Jalen Reed, he's number 1 this year instead of number 7. And I'm a huge Zakee Wheatley fan. It shows how good we are that he's not starting, because I think he is going to be an elite safety, next year, because Keaton Ellis is really good too. But I'm really high on Zakee Wheatley. And then, I mean, even a kid like Mekhi Flowers from Steel High as a redshirt freshman, I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing out there, because he is big, he is quick, he has great hands, and he's our third string free safety, and he can play, man. So I'm really excited for this group. Like Zach said, my question was going to be Johnny Dixon. I feel like there was like 3 or 4 plays last year that I can think of where he was out of position and a liability. But then there's like 3 or 4 plays that he made that I don't know how he made them. So can he be more consistent? I mean, I love flashy plays, but we need to get rid of the question mark plays. As now he is the starter at cornerback. He's not sharing time with anybody. It's his job. I think he'll step up. I think he will, but he has to at this point.
Yeah, and my last thought on the defense is I think Manny Diaz might need to go to his house in Miami and dig out some of those turnover chains, because there's going to be a lot of them this year, I feel like.
Oh, man, how long are we going to have Manny Diaz? I think that's the question.
That's a real question.
This year, is he gone?
This might be
Sorry, Zach.
I mean, just talk about it.
I was agreeing. I would not be shocked if this was the last year that we had him.
I mean, talk about a guy who Franklin went out and got. People were saying, oh, he should like take some time away from football and just kind of like get back into it slowly. And we just went and plucked him, brought him in, and just instant success. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he has some offers, depending on how the season plays out.
Yeah, and this is might be. I mean, I think I've said to you before, Jordan, I think Franklin right now is in as good a place as he's been in his Penn State tenure as far as his relationship with his coordinators at the moment. And I think Brent Pry largely did a good job. And I mean, obviously Virginia Tech hired him to be their head coach. So I think he knew what he was doing. But I think Franklin, I'll use an example last year with Yursich and the power T formation. You know, we had griped for years and years and years Franklin's unwillingness to go under center. You know, we wouldn't even go under center for like the victory formation, and it just seemed like he was being so stubborn for no reason whatsoever. And so to see them come out last year and just have this like old school formation that they ran a lot of stuff out of and a lot of punches and counter punches out of, told me that he got to a place where he said, I got my offensive coordinator. I trust this guy. I'm going to let him do his thing. We're going to be different. And that's okay, because I don't need to micromanage, and I don't need to insist on it always has to be this way. And we can never change it. Same thing with, I think to some degree with Manny Diaz, the Brent Pry era was not one where we were like a crazy blitz happy team where we'd have, 8 defensive backs on the field the way we saw sometimes last year. But I think he thought, I brought in Manny Diaz. I got to let him be Manny Diaz. I got to let him do it the way that he wants to do it. Utilize the strength that we have with our defense, which obviously last year was the secondary, and the linebacker was a huge question mark going into the year last year. So again, I have been perhaps a Franklin hater over the years, but I really got to give him credit for where he's at right now with his coaching staff. And it appears to me that he's identified the right guys, brought them in, and then let them do their thing, and not try to micromanage and sort of force the square peg into the round hole.
Yeah, I agree. We've seen massive change on both sides of the ball. And like you said, it just goes back to that trust. And I feel like Franklin has taken a step back. And maybe that's why we're seeing more success on the football field, because he trusts those guys and lets them implement their style. So anything else for the defense, guys?
Nothing? I have a question, Zach. I need a prediction from you, buddy. Where does Penn State rank in the Big Ten on defense at the end of the year?
I'll say third. I'll say Michigan and Iowa have as far as points per game, I'm assuming is what you're asking, like the average points per game. Yeah, I'll say probably third. I'll say Iowa and Michigan come in a little bit lower. Iowa largely just because they slow the game down and play caveman football. And I also think the Manny Diaz style, and we saw this a little bit last year, we're going to get a lot of turnovers. We're maybe going to score some defensive touchdowns, but we're going to be aggressive. And that sometimes leads to the other team taking shots and scoring, and a fair amount of defensive pass interference, because you're asking your corners to just be out there on an island a good bit. So I'll say third. Anything lower than third for me, I think we need to be, I'd love to say first. I mean, I think our defense is as good as anybody. And I would say if anybody other than Michigan or Iowa has statistically a better defense than Penn State this year, I'd be a little bit disappointed. I think Illinois will have a solid defense, but I'll go with third.
Okay, I like it.
All right, moving on to special teams. Losing Barney Amore last year, I mean, he was a phenomenal punter, but we go out, we get a transfer. We get Riley Thompson, transferred in from FAU, 61 punts last year, averaged 45.4 yards. He had a longest punt of 71, which is a massive punt. 14 fair catches, 26 inside the 20, and only 3 touchbacks and 5 50-plus yard punts. Those are some great stats. I don't know if you guys get excited about the kicking game, but I love when we have a punter.
This is the Nittany No Huddle podcast. We get excited about the kicking game. What kind of question is that?
I love it when we have a punter who can just trap people. And last year we did that, and it really set up our defense. And I think we're going to see a lot of the same coming from Thompson this year. But what are you guys' take on our punting situation?
Obviously, I've never watched Riley Thompson punt, so I'm solely going on statistics because I've never watched a Florida Atlantic game other than if the year that they played Penn State, which was like 07 or 08 or something like that. Just looking at his stats, I think he's a great get in the transfer portal. 43% of his punts roughly inside the 20. I think an average of 45 or 45 and a half is almost a perfect average for a punter, because average is so misleading sometimes, because you could have a phenomenal 35-yard punt that pins them at the 5 or the 6 or whatever, or you could have obviously a 71-yard punt that completely flips the field. So average can always be misleading. I think that's a number that everyone dives into so hard. For me, a number in the mid 40s is always good for a punter, and the fact that let me rephrase that. 26 of his punts are inside the 20, and 14 of them were fair caught out of 61. So that means that he was pinning people in bad positions, either inside the 20 or they're getting fair caught. I think we've had great punters the last several years, and Riley Thompson might be the next one.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's a really good observation. People get a little bit confused about the punting yards. I mean, it's easy when you're Iowa's punter and you're always punting from your own 15-yard line because you can't get a first down. You're going to be punting farther. It's just the way it is, right? But also Penn State, we talked about linebacker U, running back U, whatever you want to call it. Blake Gillikin, Jordan Stout, Barney Moore was really good last year. I think that was something that flew under the radar. The defense was very solid, but Barney Moore was really good. We've had, and I harken back to the early Franklin eras where we lost games because we didn't have competent punting. Yeah. And it's with a team like this, it really shouldn't. I don't want to say it shouldn't matter. That's kind of an arrogant thing to say, but we have been sort of blessed over the last, we'll say 6 to 8 years between those three punters of just having really good punters that just go out there and do their job, and you never really notice what's going on because it's just consistent competency in the punting game, which is, as a defense, that's all you're asking for. Just catch the snap, don't shank it out of bounds, just kick it down there, kick it high so we can get down and cover it, and just let us do our job. That's really all you're looking for. So the less we hear that name this year, probably the better, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. And then talk about our transfer portal. Got another transfer, Alex Felkins, transferred from Columbia for a place kick holder. I won't dive too much into his stats here, but he was a 3-time All Ivy League honoree. Biggest takeaway from him, he's averaging over 65% on field goals, but 28 for 28 on extra points. That's all I want in a kicker. Like, just do not miss an extra point. So he had a 53-yard field goal last year, so he's got some range, which is good. But I'm just happy we have been utilizing the transfer portals and going out and getting these guys who just come in and, do their job, and we don't have to talk about, being scared to kick a field goal, But that's all I really got on him. If you guys have anything to add.
No, but I agree.
I don't.
His numbers.
I don't have much on him. I know last year it was odd. There was a number of games where they were utilizing Sanders, Sadehak, and Gabriel and Nwosu, sort of like going back and forth on kickoff duty, which was very odd. Like, you think you pick one and roll with it. But I've seen Falcons listed as the kickoff guy too. So if nothing else, come the West Virginia game, who's doing the kickoffs?
Yeah. All right, moving on. I'm just going to throw our graphic up here.
Jordan, one last thing for special teams. I teased this earlier. They just announced today that Dominic DeLuca is going to wear number 0 this year, which is Penn State's rugged guts special teams leader. The number 0 is really special to me, so it's cool that that's a number that's special to Penn State. And I just wanted to give that a shout out that Dominic DeLuca was awarded that award today, that he's going to wear the number 0, which Jonathan Sutherland has worn before. I think this is the 3rd year that they've done this, where they've given it to this emotional special teams leader, giving them the number 0. They have a graphic that says it's endless possibilities. They're infinitely a good teammate. My special connection to number 0 makes that special to me. So I just wanted to toss that out there.
Yeah, good stuff. I did not see that today, so I'll have to take a look at that. But we'll move on out of special teams and everything. We're going to go to the schedule for this year, and I'm going to throw up our graphic of all the wins and losses, and we'll just go line by line. Starting with West Virginia game coming up, I don't see us having any issues with West Virginia. Some people are teasing that it's like, oh, big underdog game. I don't think West Virginia is that good. Certainly not. I mean, maybe they're better than Auburn was last year, but I just don't think they have the same size and capabilities as, we started off on the road at Purdue last year. So I'm not too worried about it. It's a night game at Penn State. I think we go and take care of business. What do you guys?
Yeah, I think we take care of business. Night game in Beaver Stadium. I'm not too worried.
Pretty much echo those same points. I think West Virginia is in an interesting spot. Neil Brown is one of the coaches that you keep reading about as being on the hot seat. So this would obviously be a great feather in their cap to get, but I think the night game angle is a big part of it. I think they haven't announced who their quarterback is yet, which again, I guess technically Penn State hasn't either, but they don't have a guy returning the way that Penn State does. So all the predictions I've seen as far as the Big 12 goes have West Virginia pretty far down the ranking, so they're not expected to do a whole lot. But again, like we saw with Purdue last year and Wisconsin 2 years ago, Penn State won both of those games. But whenever you play a live opponent in Week 1, the way that they're playing, comparing West Virginia to say Akron or Kent State or Delaware or UMass, that's a real team from a real conference with real Power 5 athletes. You got to show up and you got to be ready to play. But they should theoretically have no trouble.
And I like that we're playing West Virginia. I mean, obviously West Virginia is about 3.5, 4 hours from State College, maybe 4 hours. Like that's cool to me. So I like it.
And getting back to the Purdue and Wisconsin examples from the last 2 years, I love Week 1 coming right out and playing a real team. I hate the whole Week 1 and 2 and 3 are cupcakes, and I hate the whole cupcake games in general, but the last 2 years, Penn State was able to springboard early with wins in Week 1 against, in those cases, those were Big Ten games, which were even maybe bigger than this one. But even if West Virginia doesn't end up being great, it's a Big 12 team, it's a Power 5 team, it's a sort of a regional rival that you fight for recruits over, and just being able to come out Week 1 and play a team like that where you can come out of the first Saturday kind of knowing what you have, right? Whenever you play Delaware, somebody like that in Week 1, it's just kind of like, okay, the season started, but it really hasn't, because we really don't know what we got.
Yeah, it's almost preseason like, which brings us to game number 2, UDEL. No issues there. I expect us to just take care of business, get our starters out of there. I'm sure you guys probably feel the same there.
Oh, the only thing I'll say is that Delaware is ranked number 21 in 1AA or FCS, excuse me. I think we should win by 3 or 4 touchdowns, but I always think back to that Villanova game a couple years ago when Villanova was ranked like 4th in FCS, and we struggled for 3 quarters, 2.5 quarters. I don't think that's as easy as a cakewalk as, say, UMass in Week 6 and some other games, but we should win by 4 touchdowns.
I agree.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to the Zach's circled game on our list here. 3rd week at Illinois. I'll let you take this one first, Zach.
Yeah, this first off, this is your classic trap game, right? Everybody knows what a trap game is. You've got a big game the next week, right? Everybody is going to be amped up for that Iowa game. It's in Beaver Stadium. It's the whiteout. It's the first infamous 2021 game where both teams were ranked in the top 5, and we had a lot of injured players, and they were booing our injured players. And this is a game. The Iowa game is one that everybody's circling, but you can't look past the week before. First road game, Illinois, 12 p.m. local time. So it's your classic sleepy 11 a.m. Big Ten start. This is a team that is built, I think, in a way that doesn't fit nicely with what Penn State wants to do. They're sort of like a Michigan without the Michigan caliber player. Obviously, we won't even talk about the 2021 9 overtime game, but the weaknesses that we talked a little bit about on the Penn State defensive side, the lack of bulk up front. Not that I think run defense is a weakness, but compared to the pass defense, it perhaps is lesser. They're a team that I think can do some things that matches up fairly well with Penn State. And when you couple that with it's the first road game, 12 a.m. start out in Champaign, and then the Iowa game being the following week, it just concerns me. It just concerns me that it's your classic trap game. And I really like Brett Bielema. I think he's a good coach. I think he does more with less. And so I ended up, as you see on the banner here, I ended up predicting a win, but I would not be shocked to see this one as a loss.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to lose, but I definitely think it's going to be a lot closer than what people think when you're just looking at the schedule. Moving on, big night game, the Whiteout versus Iowa. I know we all have it marked as a win. I have a hard time getting over this idea that Iowa is going to be terrible on offense. I know they got Cade McNamara, right? From Michigan.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, they were like one of the worst offensive teams last year. I'm not sure they were just one quarterback away from being something great. They're going to have a great defense again, but I think we take care of business. We just don't typically lose home night games unless they're Ohio State. Just my thoughts. What are you thinking, Devin?
Yeah, I went back and forth on this a lot. I actually think Iowa. I predict Iowa's going to win the West this year. As odd as it sounds, because obviously Iowa's defense has been elite the last several years. They actually returned more starters on offense this year. They returned 8 starters on offense. Plus, they get a really solid quarterback in Cade McNamara. He's not outstanding by any means, but he's solid, and he showed in his time at Michigan some glimpses of being pretty good. Like Jordan said, what it came down to me was that the fact that this is the whiteout game, and Penn State just finds a way to beat people on the whiteout game. If this was at Iowa, I would mark it down as a loss. There's no doubt in my mind. Not that we couldn't win, but I would have marked it as a loss. But the fact that it's at Beaver Stadium for the whiteout game, I think Penn State wins. But this game could legitimately be what year was it that it was 6-4, Zach? Like, this game could be really low scoring.
It definitely could. That was 2004, by the way. Thanks for the nightmare fuel for this evening. But so I'll be the oddball, and as pessimistic as I just was about Illinois, I think Penn State wins comfortably. I trust Petty James Franklin in this one. I think he is going to have them amped up. They're going to remember 2021. I do agree. With Devin, I actually think Iowa wins the West. Not that that's necessarily anything to brag about. Wisconsin's kind of breaking in a new coach, but I think Iowa wins the West. I think Cade McNamara is a solid quarterback. They brought in a tight end transfer from Michigan as well, Eric All. At the Michigan game, he had the game-winning touchdown pass in that game. I think they're going to be better on offense. I just think whiteout, if we get any sort of lead whatsoever and we force them to chase, they're just not built to do that, especially not under the whiteout conditions. So I don't think it's going to be a blowout because it's hard to blow Iowa out. I mean, the way they play, but I think it's a comfortable win.
Yeah, I agree with you guys there. We'll move on. The next game, next two really. Northwestern, UMass. Northwestern's going to be terrible. Obviously, getting rid of Pat Fitzgerald. I just don't. I'd be shocked if they win more than 2 games all year. UMass, another cupcake. We'll move right ahead to number 7 at Ohio State. I think we go into Columbus, and I think you're going to see, it's just my prediction, you're going to see Ohio State take a step back this year, and they are going to be the 3rd best team in the Big Ten East, in the Big Ten, really. But hot take, I think Ryan Day is going to get fired this year. That's just, I have this feeling that people are not going to be happy if he's not winning Big Tens, and I know that's crazy to think about, but that's kind of the standard at Ohio State. So what do you guys think?
So Zach, I'll kick it off because I have us losing this game. The one big thing that I took into consideration is that this hasn't been announced yet what time. But I feel like looking at the schedule for that week, it's going to end up being big noon. And I feel like Penn State, doesn't play well at Columbus anyways. And playing at noon, if it was 3:30, I think I'd maybe feel a different way. But being at noon, I mean, at least it's not probably gonna be the night game and a blackout or whatever they call it. Just trying to copy Penn State. But either way, playing at noon, I think it's going to be really tough because it's probably going to be the Fox game. I agree that I don't think Ohio State is the Ohio State that they've been, the last several years. But man, they still got stupid talent. Their wide receiver room is unbelievable. With us questioning our wide receivers, I would take any wide receiver on Ohio State's roster right now, and he might be our number one. I mean, their third or fourth string guys might be our number one. But when you got Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming, and Emeka Egbuka, that is a heck of a starting wide receiver room. The question is, how does Kyle McCord do as the starting quarterback? I don't really know a lot about him, but I think he's a question mark. And then defensively, you still got JTT. You got Tommy Eichenberg back there at linebacker, who's really good. You got some decent cornerbacks and defensive backs. I mean, Ohio State's still really good, and playing at the Horseshoe is no joke. One thing that I'm just going to throw out there that I think is really funny is that Ohio State's backup quarterback is listed as number 33. What's going on? That's weird. Totally random. I just saw it. Made me laugh.
That's why he's going to get fired.
Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, Teddy Bridgewater out there. But
yeah,
it's going to be a great game. But I don't have confidence yet that Penn State can beat Ohio State.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. And I do not lightly pick Penn State to go in there and win. One thing you said, I'm not sure that Kyle McCord is the starter. And again, we've talked multiple times now about coaches not naming their starter before the season and what that may mean or not mean. But everything I've heard from Ryan Day seems to convince at least that there is a legitimate QB battle going on between Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. And look, you just mentioned about the receiver room. It may not matter who the quarterback is, right? As long as they're just moderate competent. But the thing I've been talking about all offseason is Ohio State had a left tackle and a right tackle that both got drafted and both are expected to compete for, long-term starting jobs in the NFL. And I think you go back and watch the Penn State-Ohio State game last year, and the difference was Marvin Harrison, and then the difference was at the line of scrimmage. Their offensive tackles against our pass rush, which largely did not get home and did not lay a finger on C.J. Stroud. And then JT Tuimoloau, Zach Harrison, and others just annihilating our offensive tackles. And everything I've heard out of the Ohio State sources so far is that they're a little bit unsure about who their tackles are. They brought in a transfer from San Diego State. So I think if you see I'm actually not – I expect whoever the quarterback is to be pretty good. It's Ohio State.
Yeah.
Ohio State broke in a quarterback that didn't have a good year, and you're going back a good way. So I expect he'll probably be good enough. But if they're not elite at the offensive tackle position, that's where I think Penn State can kind of close the gap, because I think that's largely been the area where we just haven't quite been there. I mean, I think you're right about the receivers. They are really, really good. I like our corners, though. I like our secondary. I mean, I think that's an area where we have to be able to say, look, we got to match up. We're just gonna have to match up. We gotta take our lumps. So I feel like Franklin has actually been pretty good in Columbus. If you look back at the recent history,
that's true.
2021, it was 33-24. That was the week after the Illinois debacle. Penn State had it within a touchdown in the fourth quarter. 2019. When Will Levis came in for an injured Sean Clifford, Penn State lost 28-17. That was the game, if you remember, Chase Young had like 37 sacks and was throwing our left tackle into the quarterback. And then 2017, I'm sorry, Jordan, I know you're going to have nightmares now too, but Penn State blew the 13-point fourth quarter lead. They were up in the fourth quarter and blew it. You can go all the way back to 2015 and 2013, which is largely when Penn State was riddled with scholarship reductions to find a game in Columbus where Penn State did not compete. So generally speaking, Franklin takes the team into Columbus and they generally play well. So I expect this year should be no different. And I think this defense is going to be legit. We'll get to the Michigan game and I'll tell you a little bit why I have different predictions, but I just think this team is built the way he has built his roster over the years is to compete with Ohio State. And eventually we got to break through. So I'm just, law of averages. We've played a lot of competitive games with them. It's got to happen at some point.
Yeah. I have them as, I think it'll be a close game, but I think we're going to come out of Columbus with a win. Moving on, another game of a team that has given us problems in the past, Indiana at home. I think we take care of business. Hopefully we're riding that win and just take care of business there. We all have wins there. But another very interesting game following that at Maryland. Zach, I know you're going to have some opinion there. Maryland is going to be a good football team this year and very easily could have only one loss headed into that game. So,
yeah, I think if you look at Maryland's schedule, and I don't have it in front of me, but it's basically it's backloaded. They don't play Iowa. I don't think they play Iowa or Wisconsin with their West crossover. So I think you're right. I think they play Ohio State at some point before the Penn State game. And I mean, they have Tagovailoa back. They have a lot of offensive talent back. I think to expect Maryland might be the 5th or 6th best team in the Big Ten this year, depending how things shake out in Wisconsin and Iowa, maybe the 4th best team. So I think that's a game. I don't have it as high up on my trap game list as the Illinois game, but I think it's definitely one that as the season progresses and we learn a little bit more about Maryland, that you got to keep your eye on. But it's Maryland and we got to beat them, and we just have to beat them. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really have anything else to say. I agree. I think Maryland's going to be good. I think they're going to end the year with 3 losses to the 3 best teams in the Big Ten East, which is probably an unbelievable season for Maryland in the grand scheme of things. But to go to Beaver Stadium South, we just have to win. So
I like it. I just looked their schedule up as well. They open the non-con with Towson, Charlotte, and Virginia all at home. Virginia is not expected to do a whole lot. They then have a road game at Michigan State, Indiana home, at Ohio State, Illinois home, at Northwestern before the Penn State game. So conceivably, probably losing to Ohio State, Illinois at home could give them a challenge. If they can win on the road at Michigan State, it is not outside the realm of possibility that they are 7-1 going into a home game with Penn State, which would
probably
be
give the students off school on Friday.
Probably the biggest game that they've had in decades, honestly, if they're able to pull that off.
Yeah, definitely one to keep an eye out on. And then we got our 10th game of the season versus Michigan. I have us losing this game at home. Michigan could arguably be the best team in the country with who they're returning. Their running game is extremely elite. I just don't see us. I think it'll be a closer game than most people think, but if we want to make the playoffs, it needs to be a close game. So that's kind of my take on it. Devin, you want to go ahead on this one?
Yeah. So in all reality, I just wanted to be a little bit different. I think between Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, I think you could flip a coin, and I would not be surprised with the results at all. I think those 3 teams are so close together that it doesn't surprise me one way or the other. I mean, you see on that graphic whenever it's up there is that all 3 of us pick us to go 11-1. All 3 of us have us losing to another Big Ten team, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan and Zach both have Ohio State then beating Michigan, and there's a 3-way tie, and I would have Michigan beating Ohio State, and there's still a 3-way tie. I think that's probably what's going to happen. It's just, do we lose to Ohio State or Michigan? I just don't think we're going to lose to both. And since Michigan was at home, I took it, even though I think Michigan is the better team.
Yeah, really. I actually think Michigan's going to beat Ohio State too and go undefeated. But
okay.
Yeah, that's what I have as well.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I think going into the season, and maybe this is apparent just because of the last 2 years, obviously Michigan beating Ohio State Michigan knows who they are. They have no question marks going into the season. And I think Ohio State has, comparatively speaking to a normal Ohio State season, a little bit more question marks than they normally have. Penn State breaking in the new quarterback, receiver. We've got a little bit of question marks. I think Michigan is the most complete team at the moment. That obviously can change. They have a horrendously weak non-con schedule, which that could come back to bite them, when they enter into Big Ten play and just not be ready. Jim Harbaugh's sitting out the first 3 games with a self-imposed suspension over buying some kids cheeseburgers or something. But I just think Michigan is rolling right now. I think just if you see what they've done in the portal as well, they had such a great offensive line the last 2 years, and they lost a number of guys, and then they just go out in the portal and they find elite talent to come in and replace them. And we doubted McCarthy last year at the quarterback position, and he had a really good year. And of those 3 teams, they're the team that's bringing their quarterback back as well. So you got to factor that in. My heart tells me that of those 2 games, the Michigan game should be more winnable for Penn State just because it's at home. But it's not going to be a whiteout. It's not going to be a night game. So how much of a boost is that? Remains to be seen.
Yeah, I agree. And then we'll finish out the season. Should take care of business versus Rutgers. And Michigan State this isn't, mid 2000s or even mid 2010s, I should say. Michigan State, where I just don't think they have the talent anymore that they used to have. And I think we've solidified ourselves as that borderline, that next tier of top of the Big Ten. And I think we take care of business out there in East Lansing that last week. Any additional thoughts before
at Ford Field?
Ford Field.
Oh, Ford Field. Sorry.
Yeah, how do we feel about that? Black Friday. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it is. I kind of like it. I kind of like it, actually, because every time we go out to East Lansing, it's like a monsoon or a snowstorm, and just
that's fair.
Yeah, and I think just the novelty of there's going to be a lot less games on Friday, and I don't know. I think it's interesting. We'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm with Jordan. I think that's a game we win. I think we've really started to distance ourselves. It's interesting if you look back, and we talked about this a lot last year, the Franklin contract extension, and Jordan talked earlier about the relationship with the AD and Franklin's happiness with getting yeses and the facilities and whatnot. Contrast that with Mel Tucker. They both signed extensions at basically the same time. Mel Tucker's first year, they get 10 wins, they win 11 wins, they win the Peach Bowl against Pitt, and then last year I think they were 5-7. So if you're a Michigan State fan, you've got 2 years in the Mel Tucker era, and you're, well, who are we? Are we year 1 or are we year 2? And this is your year to maybe right the ship, or if you have another bad year, all of a sudden that one good year is that just an aberration? Was that just a fluke? We'll see. I mean, part of the Michigan
for you.
State,
Yes.
yeah, and here's my view on Michigan State in the last 15 years. Basically, the Mark D'Antonio era was they capitalized on Michigan being down. Right, Michigan was down, and they capitalized. Michigan's not down anymore. And if you're a high school player in the areas that Michigan or in Ohio or anywhere where those two schools are competing for recruits, you're not winning that recruiting battle against Michigan anymore. And you maybe were back in the day, but you're not right now.
Not unless Jim Harbaugh leaves. But yeah, that's all I got for our predictions there. We all have us going 11-1. Hopefully we make the playoff with 11-1. Depends on everybody else. Depends how close our losses are. But for time's sake, I'll just start in. We'll go to our top 25s to end the podcast. I'm just going to go through the list, starting with 25. So I got UNC, then Wisconsin. Texas A&M, I think, is a super interesting team. I wouldn't be surprised if they really turn it around this year and, surprise some people. So I have them at 23. 22, I'm taking Tulane. 21, UCLA. 20, I got Iowa, but Iowa could be good. They could be really good. they could be mid-pack, so I put them at 20. I go on a little bit of a Big 12 streak here. I got 19 Oklahoma, 18 TCU, just with their amount of people they lost last year. They are not a top 5 returning team for me. Kansas State at 17. I wouldn't be surprised if they possibly win the Big 12 this year, in all honesty. And then I got Oregon at 16 with Bo Nix at quarterback. Keep an eye out. He could be a Heisman winner there. 15, I got Oregon State. With everything with the Pac-12 falling apart, it would be hilarious if Oregon State won the Pac-12 this year. So that's kind of why I put them there, kind of hoping that happens. 14, I got Horns down. I got Texas. They're not back, but maybe Arch Manning is the answer to that. 13, Notre Dame, another super interesting team. It'll be good to see them play Ohio State early, which is one game I cannot wait for. 12, I got Clemson. Not sold on the ACC. I'm not sold on Clemson. 11, I got Tennessee. And then into the top 10, we got Utah, who put together a phenomenal year last year. That was a huge Rose Bowl win for us. 9, I got Florida State. I fully predict them to win the ACC this year. 8, I got Washington, another really good returning team out there in the Pac-12 with a Big Ten quarterback, as I like to say. 7, I got USC. 6, LSU, and then our top 5. I think Alabama is a good team. I just don't think they're the same Alabama as previous years. And then number 4, I think, like I said, I think Ohio State takes a little bit of a step back this year. And then number 3, I got the homer pick of Penn State at number 3. Number 2, Michigan could easily be 1 here, but I think you got to give Georgia the number 1 slot with who they returned and the last 2 years. That's basically how I evaluated that. And if you don't have Georgia as your number 1, I don't know what you're doing. But that's what I got for my top 25. Zach, do you want to go ahead with yours? I'll throw yours up on the screen here.
Yeah, sure. And I think largely we've got a lot of similarities. There's some small differences, and I think we all kind of have groups of teams clustered in different places. Just starting on the back end, I've got North Carolina at 25, which is largely, I think, just a Drake May ranking. I'm not at all high on the ACC as a conference this year, and I'm sure we'll talk about that week in, week out when we do our game predictions. But I've got Oklahoma 24. They're a team that really struggled last year. They also are a team that lost a ton of close games, and so I'm just kind of expecting a regression to the mean and a little bit of luck to go their way. Wisconsin at 23. They're going to be an interesting team to watch in the Big Ten this year. I think they have a chance to really kind of expand themselves as a program with Luke Fickell and try to maintain some of their identity while also recognizing that caveman era of football has kind of gone by the wayside and they need to modernize somewhat. 22, Texas Tech. I actually flirted with ranking them a lot higher. I think they are probably the sleeper team in the Big 12. They've got a quarterback that's been hurt a lot the last 2 years, but I've seen a stat that Tyler Schuff, when he starts and finishes games, they are 8-0. So that'll be interesting to watch if they can keep the quarterback healthy. Texas A&M, they are, top 5 as far as talent goes. It'll be interesting to see Bobby Petrino as the offensive coordinator with Jimbo Fisher, if that is a marriage that can actually work out. They're another team kind of like Oklahoma. I just expect them to get sort of a bounce back that just will inherently happen as a result of talent. I mean, keep in mind they beat LSU last year. Ole Miss number 20. Lane Kiffin is interesting. They're kind of flying under the radar right now. He's returning maybe the best running back in the country, or one of the better running backs in the country, in Quinshon Judkins. TCU at 19. I really would not be shocked this year if they went like 6-6. They lost the quarterback, they lost the running back, they lost the star wide receiver, they lost a lot of guys on that defensive side of the ball, and I just don't know how you replace that if you're a TCU. But I had to give them some credit, so I kept them in the top 25. Iowa, we talked about earlier. I think their defense is elite and will keep them in the mix. Kansas State 17. They bring back Will Howard, the quarterback. Deuce Vaughn's going to be tough to replace. 16, I love Oregon State, and this is the start of I think 5 total Pac-12 teams that I have in the top 16. So I'm super high in the Pac-12 this year, which is really weird to say, but it's going to be so much fun watching the last year of that conference because all of these teams that I'm about to talk about, Oregon State included, they all play each other at the end of the year. They really backloaded the schedule. So I think there's a chance these teams are all going to be ranked really high for a while, and then you're just going to have a ton of huge games in November. Notre Dame 15. They had kind of an up and down year with Marcus Freeman in year one. I really like their offensive line. I think they're going to be good, solid defensively. And I think Sam Hartman could have a huge year. The transfer quarterback in from Wake Forest could just be huge for them. 14, Texas. I don't even know what to say about Texas. Jordan, I'll just stick with what Jordan said, I guess. A lot of talent there. Quinn Ewers, when he was healthy last year, did a good job. They've got a stud receiver in Xavier Worthy. Tennessee at 13. I struggled with them. I kind of expect them to maybe bounce back, take a step back with the loss of Hendon Hooker. But they've another school that's recruited really, really well. So it's hard to ignore the talent that they have. Utah at 12. I've been hearing Cam Rising is banged up and maybe not going to be ready to go for week 1 against Florida. Hopefully they can pull it out regardless of who the quarterback is. But I really like Kyle Whittingham. We talked about this with the Rose Bowl. That's a team that's just year in, year out. He has those guys ready to play. He's one of my coaches that I always talk about doing more with less. They're never super highly ranked as far as recruiting goes, but he just gets the job done. USC number 11. I want to rank them higher. I mean, I think there's no denying the talent that Caleb Williams is. Obviously the returning Heisman, probably the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman again this year. But I just, show me a Lincoln Riley coach team that plays even above average defense. And I'd show you a team that can probably win a national title. I don't know that they can because they just haven't shown it. 10, Clemson. I've been kind of down on Clemson lately. I think the ACC, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be really weak outside of Clemson and Florida State. But they are loaded, and I expect them to go probably no worse than 11-1 just based on the schedule that they have. Maybe 10-2. Washington at 9. I really like Washington. They've got an interesting road game with Michigan State earlier in the year, so that'll tell us a little bit about Washington and probably tell us a little bit about Michigan State as well. Obviously, Penix, the quarterback, transfer from Indiana. If you're a Penn State fan, you know who he is. He's really good. They've got 2 really good receivers back. They lost their starting running back for the year here in the last couple of days, so that'll be interesting to see how they play through that and defensively where they're at. I love Oregon at number 8. I actually wanted to go with them a little bit higher. I really like Bo Nix. They've got a lot of weapons. They are replacing a lot of offensive linemen, but their defense, I think, is going to be really good. And I think in the Pac-12, if you can play even just above average defense, that's going to go a long way in a league that has a lot of really good quarterbacks. I didn't even mention with Oregon State, the Clemson transfer DJ Ungalalele, who struggled at Clemson, but I think the transfer to Oregon State could really help him just in terms of they barely threw the ball last year and they had a really good year. They just ran and played defense. So if they can get anything out of him jumping back to Oregon State, that'll be a big success for them. And then 7 and 6, I've got Florida State, LSU. That's a week 1 matchup. It's going to be really interesting to watch. You may remember last year, Florida State beat LSU because LSU had some special teams difficulties at the end of the game. Whichever team wins that game, I think can really parlay that week 1 win into skyrocketing up the rankings. I have Penn State at 5. I really for me, I had Georgia and Michigan as their own little subgroup, Alabama and Ohio State as the next group, and then probably Penn State, LSU, and Florida State jumbled together. I just felt like Penn State with what they're returning is probably appropriately slotted in at 5, Ohio State at 4, Alabama at 3, Michigan at 2, Georgia at 1, and I agree with with Jordan. I think there's probably an argument there that you could actually have Michigan number 1, just because of the uncertainty of the quarterback position with Georgia. But if you look at their schedule, they're going 12-0. There's maybe Tennessee, maybe they lose to Tennessee. That's it. They're not losing. They're going to be 12-0. They're going to be number 1 all year. So that's my top 25.
All right, good stuff there. Devin, I'll throw it over to you, and then we'll wrap up the show here.
All right, I'll go nice and quick because you guys covered pretty much everything. I have Texas Tech at 25. I have South Carolina as my one kind of difference from both of you at 24. I think Spencer Rattler is going to have a good enough season. They've won 9 games last year. I think they're going to find a way to just hover around that 8 to 9 wins, and be in the back half of the top 25. Wisconsin at 23, Texas A&M at 22, Ole Miss at 21. I think UNC is a little better than people are thinking, other than just Drake May. So I have them at 20. I'm just a little bit higher, I think. TCU, exactly what Zach said. They're losing a lot. And this is more of a, hey, congratulations on what you did last year. We're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So I kept them in the top 20, even though, like he said, it would not surprise me at all if they're 7-5, 6-6, something like that. Iowa at 18, Big Ten West champions, in my opinion. Oregon State at 17. I have Clemson all the way down at 16. I think they are stupid overrated. I don't think they're any good, but they're going to go 10-2 at worst. But I just don't think they're any good. Kansas State at 15. Oregon at 14. Obviously, Bo Nix, a Heisman candidate. Tennessee at 13. Utah at 12. I'm pretty high on Notre Dame right now, which sucks because I hate Notre Dame almost as much as I hate Ohio State. But I really like Sam Hartman. I think he's a sleeper for the Heisman. I think they return a lot of talent from last year, getting kind of accustomed to Marcus Freeman and how his style was. I would not be surprised at all if they beat Ohio State here in a couple weeks. Number 10, I have Texas. I just don't know. Like, I feel like Texas should be really good this year, but they're going to find a way to screw it up because they always do. Florida State at 9, Washington at 8. I think Washington wins the Pac-12 when all is said and done. I just don't think they're quite there yet. USC at 7. Caleb Williams it's really good, but like Zach said, can they play any defense? And if they can, I think they fight for a national champion. They beat Washington for the Pac-12, and they fight for a national championship. But I think Washington's more complete eventually. 6, Alabama. 5, Ohio State. 4 is Penn State. I have LSU all the way up at 3. I've been trying to do a little bit more. Part of it was that I wanted to be a little different, but I started doing some research, and LSU was the team that stood out to me. I think their offensive line is going to be really, really good. I think we talked about how good Penn State's line was with 7 guys with experience. LSU is in that similar category. They have 6 guys that started at least 5 games last year, and then they have a freshman that they're really high on. I think LSU is a sleeper. I think they take care of Florida State next weekend on Labor Day weekend, and I think they surprise a lot of teams by, I don't know if they run the table, but they're going to be good. And then obviously Michigan and Georgia 1 and 2. Like everyone said, I think they could be flipped, but I mean, Georgia's won a lot of football games the last couple of years, so I think you give them the benefit of the doubt. And they're going to – I think everyone on this podcast specifically is going to move them down because they play nobody. They have the easiest schedule in the entire college football top 25 of anybody that we see. I mean, their schedule is awful. And we specifically as a podcast have always kind of penalized teams for playing cupcakes. So I think they start at number 1. They probably end at number 1, but in the middle somewhere, they're going to be down at 2, 3, 4, depending on who beats who.
Yeah, I will say in Georgia's defense, because I've seen this fight play out in various comment sections. They were supposed to play Oklahoma in the non-con, and when the
Correct.
SEC got Texas and Oklahoma, the SEC made them kill that, and so that's why their non-conference schedule is just atrocious. And being in the East, like there's such a big gap in my mind between the SEC West and the East. They only get 2 crossover games, and their protected rival is Auburn, who, if Auburn sneaks up and surprises, that could be a competitive game. But
Doubt.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think Hugh Freeze, not to get off track, but I think Hugh Freeze was a bold hire for Auburn, we'll say.
That's one way to put it. But yeah, I think that's all we got. I know we're pushing like 2 hours. It's quite a doozy of a podcast. Probably should have broke it up, but we'll roll with it this time. It's a good first one back. You guys have anything else before we sign off?
I'm just excited for that West Virginia game.
I'm excited for the whole college football being back.
And week 1, Penn State's going to be on NBC. I don't remember watching Penn State play on NBC except maybe back like in 07, 08 when they played Notre Dame. And there's going to be games on CBS too. It's just a whole new.
Yeah.
We could have a whole other
game.
We could have a whole other podcast on realignment and the TV deals and all that craziness, but it's getting hard to keep up. And Peacock, we've talked about games on Peacock. I think the Delaware game is going to be on Peacock.
Delaware's Peacock exclusive.
So,
yeah. All right. Well, that's all.
People, don't complain about it. It's $5 a month, and you get to watch The Office. It's $5. Suck it up.
There you have it. Gotta make sure I clip that. All right, that's all we got. Nittany No Huddle Nation.
Thanks for watching the Nittany No Huddle podcast.
Check us out on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
Podcasts are posted weekly on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss one of our new shows.